Hello, so today I'm going to show you how to make randomly spawning sound effects that are located in the world and they stay there once they're spawned. This is really good for any sort of spatial audio, and it actually just sounds generally better than using a middleware like Wise or Fmod and doing a scatter sound and having randomly placed audio objects which are static in your stereo spread. So when you move your camera, then it stays stuck to your right speaker instead of maybe panning over to give a more sort of realistic feel of how sounds actually work in the real world. I will demonstrate this now. First off, we have the shells from the gun. If you hear them when I'm just static, you can hear that they randomly switch from left to right. And then if I move, excuse the dodgy animations, but so that is the gunshots, and you can hear that the shells are falling onto the floor, and as I move around the world, the sounds stay to the floor and they pan left and right. Secondly, I will show you how to make random objects spawn in the world. So I've got a trigger volume, and that has frogs in it. So as I walk to this, you can hear frogs around there. So you can see as I'm moving my controller, the sounds also pan with the controller. Great, so I'll show you how to do that. First of all, we have to make the audio cue. So it's important that this is a one-shot trigger and not a looping sound, not a randomly triggering sound. If you're using Fmod or Wise, this needs to be a one-shot, like a gunshot. So to do that, I'm going to use some birds. So I'm going to make an ambient bird sound cue. Open this up and select these and random multiple WAV. So then we can have some randomization on there and modulation. This should always be 1, and then we can just bring the volume down a little bit and change the pitches slightly. There we go. And let's see what that sounds like. Great. I actually think that the volume can come up a bit. Then also something we need to remember is setting the attenuation, the spatialization, and making sure that we can actually hear an object and where it's located in the world with attenuation. So normally you should probably make a general class of ambient animals, and then you can just bring that in with all the settings, but as this is a demo, I'll do that now. So override attenuation, make sure you enable spatialization. I usually do binaural, for some reason it just sounds better to me. Non-spatialized radius, usually just put that to like about 2 or 3, just so that you don't get any nasty snapping between the left and right speaker when you're walking through the environment. I also like to put this on natural sound. Again, it just sounds better to me, but you can choose your own setting. Inner radius, so this has got to be quite small, because when we're having the sound source located in the trigger volume, we don't really want it to constantly sound like it's in both left and right speaker. So I'm going to put that at about 50, and then this is fine, maybe even larger, so 4000. Cool, so that's how you basically set up the sound cue. Super simple. I'm sure everyone's done something similar to this. You can make it more complicated if you like, but the main thing to take away from this is that it has to be a one-shot. Don't have anything looping, don't have anything triggering multiple sounds. It's just a one-shot of the birds. So I'll save that. Now this is where things start to get a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to pull in a sphere trigger, scale it up. You can get the shortcut for that by pressing R, and then select all of them and just make it much, much bigger. I'm going to make this bigger than my frog one so you can hear birds and frogs together. And then W again changes it to where you can move it in the world. I'm just going to move it around here. I might even scale it up a bit bigger. There we go. So now we have a massive radius where you going to be able to hear birds, and you're also going to be able to hear the frogs that I showed you earlier. So once you've made your trigger sphere, I just do add blueprint in audio, as it's an audio blueprint. We can say ambient birds blueprint. So this is the viewport. We don't really need to do anything in here. What we need to do is go to the event graph, and we can delete these. We don't need these. All we need is event actor begin overlap and event actor end overlap as its trigger, and that is standard. Well, the first thing that we have to do is set up if the character is going to be in the trigger box or not in the big trigger box. The best way to do this, I've found, without doubling up nodes and stuff, is just make a Boolean variable. So I'll call this variable actor in area. And Boolean is just basically a yes or no. It's very simple. It's a very simple variable. So we're going to set this, and when he is in the trigger volume, it's going to be yes. Copy and paste. And when he's out the trigger box, he will not be in the area, obviously. Okay, so now this is the most important thing, and the most interesting thing is casting to the character. So in my instance, it will be cast to third person character, because that is the blueprint that I am using in this demo. If you're doing a first-person shooter or another example project from Unreal or your own project, you just need to make sure that you're casting to the character that you are playing as. So in my instance, this is the third-person character. So once you've done that, you need to say play sound at location. And then this is where it starts to get interesting. So we can zoom out a bit, and off of as third person character, you say get actor location. So this is obviously casting to, so once you enter the volume trigger, it's setting this Boolean as yes, you have entered it. So then it's going, okay, now we've cast to your playable character. Now what do I have to do? I have to play the sound, but additionally I need to get the actor location. Then this is a little bit tricky. You have to split this, right click, split struct pin, and do the same here as well. And this is where we're going to start getting the randomization. So the best way to do this is pulling off the X and Y. The Z value you don't really need in most 3D games, but in virtual reality you probably will need to pull off the Z value as well. But so this is what we do. You just press add, float plus float, then random float range, float in range, and we need to do that again, and drag that off Y. Z can go, actually because I'm doing birds, I'm going to do Z as well, so because they can fly higher or lower. The frogs I didn't do this for, because obviously they're all on the ground. So yeah, add all of these. Z. And then from there, we need to make a distance. So for the frogs, I made a variable, a float variable, and called it distance. Make sure you have it as a float. And I pull that in, get the distance, and you need to compile it to, that's going to be an error because we haven't finished this yet, but anyway, if you hit compile, then you can see the distance here in the variable, and let's just set that to a default of 1000 for now. That doesn't really matter, we'll change that later. So then you need to get the distance, which we set as 1000. That will be the max. So this is basically saying, in this location where you are, you can have something spawned, which will be this. You can have something spawned at a maximum of 1000, and then to get a minimum, so maximum on the x-axis will be right, and then to get minimum, so a minus number to go to the left, you have to times it by -1 times float by float, and times it by -1. And then this gives you the minimum. So now you have a controllable variable which is going to create a space in which sounds will trigger once you have overlapped the sphere, which is this. And then all you have to do is link these back up to your locations here. So basically what this does is it gives you a random location inside your sphere, and that's where it's going to play the sound. Get your character. Where's the character? He's inside the sphere. Where's it going to play the sound? Anywhere within this distance. So let's just neaten this up a little bit. So because we want this to loop round and constantly be triggering a sound somewhere within these parameters, we need to create a delay, because otherwise it's just going to play one after the other. So delay. And then we want this to randomly trigger, so random float in between range. And here we can set the range. What we can also do is promote this to a variable. Let's call that minimum spawn time. And promote this to a variable and call this max spawn time. And we need to make all this visible so that we can edit it later. Great. So as a default, again, we need to compile. And as a default, let's say 1 second. And max as 5 seconds. That should do. Cool. So now, as we go through, it's going to cast to the character, get a random location, play the sound at that random location, and then it's going to continue its path, and it's going to be delayed at any time between your minimum and maximum variable. Now we need to, again, say, are they still in the trigger circle? Because if they are, the loop needs to continue, but if they're not, then it needs to stop. So you do a branch, and the condition is your actor in area. So that's where the Boolean comes in at the beginning. And then we set this back to the start. And just to make that a little bit neater, I like to do this. So you can see it's a loop. There we go, now we have a nice loop. And if they are no longer in the area, then you set this to false. So that can go back to there. And that means that instead of having the loop go back and trigger another sound, it's going to go to false. And that's going to be not an actor. Cool. So let's just make this a little bit neater again. Now, there is another way you can make this more customizable. If you promote this sound here to a variable, and we can call that variable audio source, and then from there, compile again. Oh, sorry, and this is why this has been failing. This object needs to be connected to that. Now compile. Yep, and now it's all good. Yeah, now we have our working blueprint, and this audio source we can have here as our ambient birds. There you go, so now it's going to trigger this. So now we have a working blueprint with the audio source as a variable, which you can change from the inspector view. Let's take a look at that in our map now. So here we have the trigger circle, and we have our variables which have been exposed. So the distance that the sounds will play from the character once he enters, the minimum and maximum spawn time, and then the sound that we want. We can change this to gunshot if we want, or whatever. The nice thing about this is we can have a blueprint. This one is actually called Ambient Birds Blueprint, but we could actually rename it to just Ambient Blueprint. And from now on, you can have your birds in there, you can have your frogs in there, you can have whatever you want, and you can rename it here to an appropriate name. So this one works as Ambient Birds. So yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at what that sounds like. So if you imagine trees all over the place, then it would sound quite realistic that there's birds coming from the canopies of the trees, even though you can't see them and even though they don't exist in the real world. Now let's go to the frogs as well. You can see as you start layering these up, you can get some really nice effects with spatialization. I assume this will work the same with Fmod events and AK events, Wise events. I haven't tried it with spatialization plugins for VR, but I'm sure it works the same. The whole point of VR is that you have a point, and now with this blueprint you have a point. So yeah, so you won't just get a sound effect sticking to your left or right speaker, even though you're changing your view. There we go. So I'll just show you the same. Basically, I set up the same thing for the gun blueprint. So if I just show you my gun, so this is how I set up the shells. It's exactly the same way. You have your fire event. So whatever your blueprint is, that trigger for your gun to fire. Here I have a sequence because I have a few other things going on, but yeah, so you do the same thing. You cast to your third person character, the same as this. We cast here to the third person character. Because this is a trigger, you get actor there. So that's the actor that it's casting to. And with this you have to get player character, so you don't get that error message. Play sound at location. And then I've just done exactly the same thing. So this is play sound at location, this is play sound at location. We don't have to do a loop with the bullets because every time the gun fires, it will trigger this automatically. So it will hit a place at the location. It doesn't need to do a loop, it just triggers. Yeah, and then you just follow the exact same rules. You get the actor at location, play sound at location, and it's basically these random random floats which are doing all the work for you. Yeah, and that's basically it. Right, so there we have it. This is the script. Perfectly customizable, works really well in the game, and yeah, let's hear it all together again. So now I believe this is just the ambient sound. That shouldn't be, yes, there's no birds playing. And then go into the sphere. And now we start hearing my birds coming in. Don't worry about that, that's just a pain box. Now no birds are triggering. Cool, so I hope that you've learned something, and that is my tutorial on Unreal Engine's random audio locations inside a trigger box/sphere. Cheers, bye.